In the previous screencast I talked about adding effects to the layer on the timeline. The next step here is now to change the effect and change it over time, which is animation. All attributes that you can change on an effect can be animated. Anything that you can change on the effect is possible to change over time. So let's try two different things. We can try to make this one rotate, and then we can as well change the saturation over time. If we start with the really simple one, rotation, we have rotation down here in the timeline. And on the right side, on the left side here of the name of the attribute, we have this small stopwatch icon. And this one is disabled now. If I turn that on, if I enable it, then I will start keyframing. And keyframing is what you do when you animate. A keyframe is a particular position in time where an effect has a specific value. Let's see how it looks. If I enable this one, I click on that one, I immediately get the first keyframe, and in the timeline I see the keyframe as a small yellow romp. And that means that on that time there, the rotation is 0. So one frame into the composite animation, rotation is 0. And if I scrub down the time here, then down here, for example, at 2 seconds and 10 frames, let's say that I want it to be rotated on that one. So I click and change, let's say 45 degrees rotation. And when I have done this change, I automatically get a new keyframe. So now, over here at the start, it is 0, and at the end of the shot, it is 45. And those are keyframes, and in between these, you have the different, from 0 to 45. And the in-between frames are calculated by the software, by After Effects. So if I play this one now, the image rotates over time. So we have a very basic animation. Now, in order to change this, there are basically two things that you can change on a keyframe. One thing is the position in time, and the other one is the attribute value. Let's start with the first one, the position in time. Let's say that I want this animation to be quicker. Then I need to bring the two keyframes together on the timeline, so they are closer, because then the change will be quicker when I play the video. So I select the keyframe here and just drag it closer to the other one. So now it's really close, and if we play this one, it's clear that it is much more quick. If I drag it in the other direction here, so they are far apart, then the animation is much slower. So that's really simple, and of course the first one I can also move around so that at first there doesn't happen anything, and then the rotation starts. And I can select several keyframes at the same time and move them around like this. Okay, so the next thing is to change the value of the attribute, the amount of change, so to speak. And in order to do that, I need to position the time marker exactly on the keyframe. And it is easy to by mistake position it a little bit on the wrong side, and when I make the change, what actually happens is that I get two keyframes. So I have the animation rotation here, and then all of a sudden it jumps in a very strange way. But that was not what I wanted. So let's get rid of this faulty keyframe here. I select it, press delete on the keyboard, and it's gone. So what I need to do is that I need to select the keyframe or be on top of it. And here comes the arrows over here to the far left, sorry. With these ones, I can jump between the keyframes. And this small rump here lights up in yellow when the time marker is on top of the keyframe. And when it is on top of the keyframe, I can change the value. Click and drag, for example, jump to the first one. Maybe I want that one to be quite, sorry, now it's like this. So now we have another kind of animation. I haven't changed any position in time. I just changed the amount of rotation. And this is how that looks. A quite quick one. And the reason why it is quick now is that the amount of change is quite much. So therefore it becomes quick. It needs to cover more ground during the time, so to speak. So there we have this animation. And when you talk about animation, it's quite natural to think of it as movement, because if you talk about animation, you kind of interpret it as movement. But it can be animation of other stuff as well. For example, the saturation of the image. So let's change the saturation. We have the effect here, the levels effect. And let's get rid of that one, because if I only want to change the saturation, then the color balance is actually a little bit simpler to use. Let's see, we have the color balance, and here we have the saturation, like this. And let's say that at the start of the video clip, I want it to be completely desaturated, black and white. And I bring that one down to -100. As long as it, well, sometimes it's easier to click and write. Okay, so now the image is completely black and white, or only gray levels. The saturation is -100 or 0, you could say also, depending on how you count. Okay, I toggle the stopwatch here to start the keyframing. And if I open up in the timeline here, I don't see any keyframes, but if I open up this one, I'll see the keyframe down here. Okay, then I go down a little bit in time, and here I raise the saturation again. Maybe I want it to be almost full, but not quite, so -10 for example, maybe a little bit lower, like that. So let's play that one. Now we will have the rotation, but we will also have the change in saturation. And of course, these kind of changes over time is very, very useful. And you can of course also change the transparency to make fade in and fade outs very simple. Another thing with the keyframes is that you can switch over to this one, and this interface is a little bit clumpy, or what you say, but there's a graph editor here, a graphical representation of the animation. So that, for example, you see here that the saturation goes from -100 to 22 or whatever. And I don't really like the interface here. It's very cluttered and small, but sometimes it can be quite good to here be able to select the keyframe. In here you can change the attribute by going vertical, up and down, or you can change the position in time by going horizontal. And that's a quite easy way to make changes. And let's say that you have several different keyframes here. Then it can be quite convenient to use the graph editor, because if I want to change all of these together, then I can drag a marquee around them like that. And as you see, the selection here has these grab markers, and that make it possible for me to change the whole animation like this, not on a keyframe by keyframe basis, but I can change the whole animation, and that can be sometimes be very convenient. But otherwise I usually don't use the graph editor, so let's turn that off. And this is how it looks without it. It is sequence of keyframes. And if I don't want the middle keyframes here, I select them and delete them.